Hey, it's Pecamo the Ace Mechanic. Today we'll be looking into a Toyota Matrix 2004 whose AC stopped working. Okay, let's go and see what we have. Let's see what's happening. Engine on. Okay, let's see what we have. Let's turn on the AC. Let's put our temperature gauge and let's see what we are having in the vents. So we have our temperature gauge. Our temperature gauge is reading 27 degrees. Our AC is still on and recirculation is being engaged. So let's take a cue at what we are having on the instrument cluster. Outside temperature is 80 degrees. It's a pretty cold day in this region. So that's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, should be about 26.6. So that's about 27.0 degrees to the nearest 10. So there's no activity being carried out here by the AC system. The AC is just blowing the ambient temperature back into the cabin. Okay, let's see what's happening in the hood. You can see the compressor pulley running with the idler pulley on the compressor. So that tells us there's no electrical problem. This is the low side hose. It's just around ambient temperature. Nothing serious is happening there. Let's look at the liquid line. The liquid line is also at ambient temperature. So this at first glance is going to make one to feel that we are having a low refrigerant. At this point, let's plug in our gauges and let's see what we have. So I have to be sure that the low side is not having air inside. So I want to purge it a bit. With liquid line or liquid refrigerant rather. So I can open it here and try to ensure that I get liquid coming out. So I won't risk introducing air into the system. So we now have liquid. So because I don't want to alter the pressures that are inside, so that I'll be sure of what we have. The high side actually has pressure from the last time I used it just recently. So we still have about 50 psi there. It hasn't leaked out and it has not been leaked out. So on the low side I had 0. So I didn't want to have atmospheric pressure equalization to introduce air into my AC system on this car. So I can leak out this pressure now, so that will get to 0. Don't forget to fasten your can tap or your canister valve so that you won't be expending what is inside there. So at this point, what I'm taking out is just what is here. Be careful of frost bites. So I'm dropping to 30, 20. So when I'm maybe around 5 or 3, then I'm going to drop it. Okay. Alright, so with this I'm not introducing too much refrigerant into the system to change the observation of what the pressures are like. So let's connect our quick connect gauges and first see our static readings and also see our dynamic readings when the compressor is running. So in this car, this is the high side port where you connect your red hose or quick connect fitting, and this is the low side. I believe you can still see it. Oops. What's happening? Okay, we are good. On our gauges, I'm sure you can see the pointers on the calibration. On the low side, we have 76 psi, and on the high side, we have 85 psi. So that's just roughly around what we have, and that's on equilibrium. Mind you, on every gauges, you can't have the low side and the high side equalize to exact value that will be mutual on both gauges. On my own gauge, I know that I used to have a disparity of about 10 psi, which is still fine. Looking at discharge, looking after a short while at the gauges, we can see that the pressures on the low and high side have increased a bit. So on the low side, we are now having 77 psi. That's on the low side, and on the high side, we are having 85 psi still. If we consult our temperature pressure charts, we are going to see that at the ambient temperature we had earlier, if you remember, we checked the vent temperatures and also the ambient temperature on the instrument cluster of the car. We're able to see that we were at 27 degrees centigrade. So the static pressure at this temperature for R134A, which this car uses, is supposed to be 88.4 psi. So if we look at what we have now, where if we interpret by the I side, we are actually having 85 psi. Having 85 psi at this ambient temperature, it's fine. So the static pressure within this system at this ambient temperature is fine. So that's a guide for you to know whether you are to recharge or not. But ordinarily, if you are used to recharging when it is hot, it's easy for you to say this is low because you might have been used to maybe about 9500 psi at around 30 or 33 degrees centigrade of ambient temperature when the sun is out and the weather is hot. But you know, with the pressure temperature relationship knowledge, you can be able to extrapolate what the static pressure is supposed to be at a particular temperature. So I'm not going to recharge this system now because we are within range. We are still fine. So I'm going to start the car now and see what we have. Ensure you're having a keen look at the gauges as I start the engine and the AC kicks in, and let's see what we're going to have. All right, now we can see that the compressor is working, but what we can notice is that despite the compressor working, we have on the low side close to vacuum. If you took note of it, initially we had the low side pressure around 10 psi, and now it's getting close to vacuum. We're having about 2 psi. And on the high side, we are having about 100 psi. That indicates that the system is working. I will be tempted to try to recharge the system again and see what we have, but I believe that that's going to be abortive, because with the ambient temperature that we have, about 27 degrees centigrade, we're able to see that we're supposed to have about 84 psi, and on our high pressure side we could fetch out about 85 psi of static pressure, which is within spec. So I don't need to charge the system again. Mind you, I must say the temperature pressure relationship guide or chart is not the final say as to whether you have sufficient refrigerant in the system, but it's a good guide. Plus, I'm very familiar with this car and I'm aware about how it was working when everything was working well. Though I've never worked on the AC of this car before except for replacing cabin air filters, but I'm the one that works on this car for every issue it has. Thanks to the owner of this car, who believes in us and always brings his car to us. With this indication so far, I'm suspecting a clog or a restriction somewhere. Most of the times, you have a restriction either on the TXV or on the condenser or on the receiver dryer device. If the restriction was on the TXV, I believe we are supposed to have at least a fairly warm liquid line after the refrigerant has been compressed into hot high pressure gas, and it has now passed through the condenser to make it a high pressure liquid with relatively lower temperature compared to before entering the condenser. We should still have a warm liquid line, but we're having a cold liquid line. So at this point, the best thing to do is to go further in a diagnosis and check whether there's a restriction. Now I want to put a probe of my temperature gauge or temperature reading device or thermometer on the discharge line, the one that comes directly from the compressor, that's the high pressure side from the compressor, and another probe to the liquid line. The liquid line is the tinier of the pipes that comes out of the condenser. The wider one is the discharge that comes directly from the compressor. I believe we can see the multimeters that are taking the temperature reading. The multimeter on the left is taking the liquid line reading, and we can see it's at 26 degrees centigrade. 26 degrees centigrade is still around that ambient temperature, so it means that no activity of change of state is happening on that line. You can see the multimeter on the right is giving us 55 degrees centigrade. That's a whole lot of difference. Almost 27 degrees centigrade of difference. That's crazy. And that discharge line is also hot to touch. I can barely hold it for 1, 2, 3, for 3 seconds before I have to take out my hand. At this point, we can go into some inferences. Taking cognizance of the results we have from the different readings that we conducted, we could conclude that given that the low side of our gauge was giving us close to vacuum and the high side was giving us 100 psi, that there's an activity on the compressor. So the compressor is working, is doing something. Whether it's pumping adequately or not, we don't know, but we could tell that it's pumping quite sufficiently enough to cause a pressure difference between the high and the low side. Now, we have also established from our readings that there's a restriction somewhere, and the restriction, which I can tell you, can be said to be around the condenser. So the restriction is localized within the condenser and the receiver dryer area. I think at this point I can isolate the TXV and I can isolate the evaporator, that there's nothing wrong with them. But be reminded that we have been able to identify that the compressor is fine, the condenser or the receiver dryer is being clogged. This being said, I want to give my first shot to the receiver dryer and see, probably it has been filled with crud and a lot of gunk, and maybe that's why it's not allowing the refrigerant pass through. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean up the receiver dryer compartment and I'm going to flush the condenser, assess the general health of the interior of the AC system, and I'll replace the desiccant bag of the receiver dryer, and I'll report back to you what I find out. Now, after flushing the whole system and fixing the broken bolts that you saw the other time, we now have a better flow from the discharge side of the condenser to the liquid line of the condenser. And now we've properly vacuumed the system and we've recharged the system, awaiting the moment of truth. If you take a look at the gauges now, I'm trying to accommodate the exposure correctly, or maybe I should do away with this. Okay. You might be wondering why we ran into the night. The process of flushing the condenser and letting it dry was a big ordeal. Then we had to extract the broken bolts that you saw the other time. So now looking at the gauges, we can see that the low side is at 80 and the high side is at 90. So you remember the error difference that we spotted earlier on the gauges. So I believe the ambient temperature should still be around 26 or 25 degrees centigrade now. So this pressure temperature relationship still tells us that this charge is still within spec. Now behold the moment of truth. My esteemed client is here getting ready to pick up his car. Let's go start the car and see what we're gonna have. All right. Now onto the moment of truth. So we can see all the way from about 24 degrees the temperature dropped. Let me increase the heat load, even though it's quite cool here, but you can see on our vent temperature gauge it's really coming down. So we are down to 10 degrees centigrade now. So apparently we have confirmed that it was due to the restriction we had on the condenser and the receiver dryer. That's why we were having issues. We are already around 8 degrees now. I believe you can see it. You can see the AC cycling on and off. So it's cycled off already. Let's check what's happening in the hood. So now the refrigerants have been properly topped off and it's at the right pressure. So we can see that while working, the high side is around 180, while the low side is around 26, 27 psi, which is not bad. Even though we can see that the condenser is not working optimally, but it's delivering well. And at this point, I believe everything is going to work well, even when the weather is hot in the afternoon. You can hear the compressor cycling in. Compressor is on now. Now the compressor is off. You might be wondering why it's cycling on and off too frequently. It's because the weather is a bit cold and it has quickly attain the desired cabin temperature, let's check what the cabin is reading. Now we can see that cabin temperatures are tending from 6 towards 5 degrees centigrade at outside temperature of 78 degrees centigrade, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. This should be about 25 degrees centigrade. So while fan is at 3/4 of the whole speed, vent is allowed to take a air feed from a recirculation pool. Ambient temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit, which is approximately 24 degrees centigrade. Vent temperature is hovering between 5 and 7 degrees. Hence, we have fixed the problem. Thank you for joining us on this episode. I hope to see you next time. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and also subscribe to our channel. You are the reason we are here, and we want to keep feeding you with more technical and repair videos. See you next time.